All right, so today I am going to talk about my experience with these speakers from France. These are the Diptyque 115s, and I want to thank the music room, tmraudio.com, for sending these along. These are planar magnetic, also considered isodynamic speakers. They use a thin layer of mylar film inside, sandwiched between two layers of MDF, and then finally steel. The front and back are made of steel. You have a felt lining over the edge. Let's talk about these rather unique and pretty incredible speakers. I'll talk about what they do really well and what they don't do really well. Hey everybody, what you see behind me are the Diptyque 115s. These are flat panel isodynamic planar magnetic speakers from France, and I've had them here for the last few weeks thanks to the music room. Now before we get going with the review, I want to give a shout out to the music room. Thank you for sending these along. The music room is an online shop. They are the exclusive online dealer for Diptyque. But the music room carries all kinds of brands of hi-fi, of audio, and they have a vast selection of used gear that you can check out every day at their fresh arrivals page. They actually get, I think, 10 to 30 new pieces each and every day. And those used pieces are checked out, examined, and photographed. And what you see is what you get. Great place to save money on used gear, as well as find some pretty cool new gear like these Diptyques. So many years ago, I had an experience with Magnepan speakers. You guys know Magnepan. They are flat panel. They are similar to these Diptyques in some ways, but I never got along with Magnepan for two reasons. The first reason was you need mass amounts of power to drive them to reach their full potential. People would buy amps the size of mini fridges to power these Magnepans. And at the same time, they had a kind of lacking in the lower bass. It's just part of the design. So people would have to, and they have to, supplement that bass with subwoofers. But Magnepans are really special in the top end, in the vocal, in the mid region. And I always said to myself, if they could solve the problem of making them easier to drive somehow and giving more bass output where subwoofers would just be optional, then that would be one heck of a speaker. Well, today I'm going to talk about these Diptyque 115s, and I think they solved those two issues. So if you're someone who really digs that flat panel isodynamic kind of sound, but you don't want to have to run 500, 300 watts per channel into them, and you don't have to add subwoofers, this might be the video for you. Now, I've been listening to these for the last several weeks, so I'm going to talk about how they came in, how they were packaged, how I set them up, listening notes, and all of that good stuff. I'm going to tell you what they do really well, better than any speaker I've heard, but there's a couple things that they don't do as well. I'll get into all of that. But first of all, when they arrived, they came in via freight, and this truck, we had to meet them down the road because some big trucks can't get onto our property. So my wife and I, Debbie and I, we went down to meet the truck, and it was this super skinny crate. And I said, there's two speakers in that crate. It was so flat, it looked like a pancake. And I'm like, oh, this will be easy to get in the car and get home. Well, lo and behold, this crate was about 180 pounds. We managed to get it home. We managed to get it to the front porch, where I unboxed them there and brought the speakers into the house. So the packaging, when you order these, they come in a very skinny, flat, pancake-like wooden crate. They are packaged very well. The stands are screwed into the crate, so nothing is loose and nothing moves around. When I unboxed them, now these were already demo units. They were already at someone else's house, and they were shipped to me from there. I opened them up, they looked perfect, and I carried the panels into this listening room. And they're not that heavy when they're on their own. The crate adds some weight, so I think they're about 75, 80 pounds each, but they're pretty easy to carry because you reach down at the bottom, grab the top, move them, right? So I got them in the room and I was like, wow, these look pretty cool. They look like modern speakers, and they're kind of, you know, when you look at them, I'm like, how are these going to pump out any kind of bass? They're so thin and skinny, and they use an ultra thin mylar membrane inside, and that's what vibrates with magnets to make the sound. That's sandwiched between a couple layers of MDF, and finally the outside, as you see them here, is steel. That's solid steel on the outside, and that's what makes these so heavy. These use a proprietary ribbon tweeter as well. So I set them up in the room, and you can set them up one of two ways. You can have the tweeter facing inwards, or you can have the tweeter facing outwards. I experimented with both, and I really enjoyed the way they sounded with the tweeter facing inwards, so that's what I went with. So before we get to listening to these speakers, I brought them in here. I want you guys to know these are 86 dB efficient. That means you're going to need a little bit of power to drive these. They're 6 ohm speakers. Now, Diptyque recommends 160 watts per channel for these to perform at their best, but that really depends on how big your room is and how loud you want to listen. Now, I listen to these with a 100 watt per channel Nagra Classic amp, and I also have a pair of Orchard Audio monoblocks. They're high-end monoblocks here. I think they're $5,000 a pair. They put out 300 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 500 into 4 ohms. So it was probably putting out somewhere in the 400 watt per channel realm with the Orchard Audio amps. I'll talk about what they sounded like with both of these amplifier options. So these are not easy to drive, but they are not very, very hard to drive. You're not going to need 500 watts to drive these things to where they're going to sound beautiful. These are also true dipole speakers. That means the sound comes from the front and the back. Now, the sound comes from the back just as much as it comes from the front. And there's a unique thing with these about listening to them. There's 2 ways to listen to these, and they will bring 2 different kinds of sounds. I'll talk about that when we get to the sound quality. Now, Diptyque says that they have solved these issues of the bass. They're saying that these put out some pretty low bass, and you don't need a ton of power. So I was about to put these to the test. So I put these in the room, I set them up, I got them all figured out where they sounded best. I sat in my sweet spot. Now, what I mean by that, a lot of you know what I mean, but some of you have emailed me and said, what do you mean the sweet spot? When you set up high-end speakers such as these, you want to kind of set them up in a triangle formation. So put them about 7-8 feet in front of you, toe them into your ears a little bit, and you want to sit right in the middle of them, about 7-8 feet back. I ended up with them, I think, 8 feet apart, toed in a little bit, and I was sitting 7 feet from them. Now, when you sit in this sweet spot, this is when you're going to hear all of what these speakers bring to the table. Now, I started out listening to some acoustics, some guitar, instrumentals, and immediately, I knew there was something special going on here because it was such a big sound. And that's because the sound emits from these type of speakers. You're getting sound from the whole entire length of the speaker. Wherever that mylar film is, that's where the sound is going to be coming from. So these have a larger than life kind of presentation. And the sound of these is very open, super transparent. They might be the most transparent speakers I've ever heard. And these type of speakers excel at that kind of transparency. It's almost like the speakers weren't here. As big as they are, and they're made of steel on the outer shell, they managed to disappear in here where I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. And that's because these present a huge cavernous soundstage. That means when I'm sitting in that sweet spot, I'll hear music floor to ceiling, wall to wall. The soundstage was wanting to be bigger, but my room was too small for it. I'm in a 13 by 18 space. So let's get to the imaging. We know the soundstage is huge. Now, as far as imaging, I don't think I've ever heard a speaker image as well as these. Voices were coming out in a 3D space so crystalline and clear. Female vocals were just so goosebump inducing. They'd come out a little bit into the room and they were large as life and breathy, and you can hear every detail in the voice, while the instruments, right, were up in space, above the speakers, in front of the speakers, behind the speakers. So in regards to imaging, these are very, very impressive. As I continued listening, I put on some carbon-based life forms, which have some pretty hefty bass in them. I started listening and I said, this sounds a little different than I'm used to, and I figured out what was going on. These have quite an amazing treble. This proprietary ribbon tweeter that is here is really, really nice. It's not strident or harsh. It's not dull or dark. It's just there. It's present, it's open, and it's fluid. The bass, the low bass, I'm talking low bass, is very impressive here. There was a point when I was setting these up and I had them in a spot, and I played a track I test with bass. I tested Fading Sun. I'll put a graphic of it up here. And right in the beginning, there's this really low bass. It's like boom, boom. And it was shaking the windows in here. And I was like, what? From these flat panels? It turned out I had them positioned just not right. So once I got them positioned, that bass smoothed out. But it was low, it was deep. Now, what about the mid-range? That's where these are different. The mid-range is more lean. There's no big punch in the mid-range. There's no bloat in the mid-range. Now, some speakers bring out a lot of bass in that mid area, the 50 hertz, the 60 hertz, the 100 hertz area. And that fills out the mids and makes them bassy, chesty, full, right? These don't do that. Vocals sound magical, but if you're going to play rock, hard rock, especially 80s, Metallica sounded kind of thin on these, and it wasn't that great, but the recording wasn't that great either, which tells me these will let you hear what's on the recording. They're not going to butter up a bad recording. They're not going to make it more appealing. But rock and heavy metal, say, something that you trash your head to, headbang, right? These don't have that mid-bass gut punch that some speakers have. And I recommend like JBLs for rock and metal. This is not a JBL. These are super refined. Every other kind of music, whether it was bluegrass, classical, instrumental piano, sounded heavenly with these. Vocals, especially female vocals, were really, really so 3D and transparent. It was spooky at times. So these speakers really excel at beauty in the music, beautiful music. If you like those types of songs that focus on vocals, jazz, right? Jazz was beautiful through these. They will really impress. But if you want to play heavy music like heavy metal or rock, I would look elsewhere. So that's what these do not do well, rock and heavy metal. You can play them on here and you'll hear it, but you just miss that visceral gut punch. So I had my wife come in here and we had the Diptyques set up, and I had my Pure Audio Project Duet 15 set up, and I played her favorite artist, Taylor Swift, for her. She sat in the sweet spot. And first we played the Pure Audio projects, and she said, wow, that sounds so good. It's so immersive. I put on the Diptyques with the same tracks, and she said she never heard Taylor's voice so present and real. And that's what I was hearing as well. The voice was just right there in the room. And that's one thing. If you like the human voice and you like that kind of sound, these are intoxicating with some music, I will say that. But they're not perfect with that heavier music. You got to keep that in mind. But she thought these were immersive. She said ethereal when she listened to that song. So that's what these excel at. They have a grand scale. They paint the musical picture on a wide canvas. They're very see-through. They're very transparent, meaning, now, a lot of transparent speakers in the past I've heard, mostly in the 90s, I'd say, were very strident and lean. These are not like that. They don't sound strident or lean. They're kind of almost organic in a way, but the way the details come out is exceptional. The low basses here, I never felt I needed a sub, even when listening to carbon-based life forms. I had that heavy bass coming and the music was everywhere. But because the mid-range is a little leaner in the bass, with some music, it can sound a little more recessed. So, you know, these are, if you ever heard flat panel planar magnetic speakers, if you ever heard a Magnepan or a Martin Logan, these have a similar vibe, but these are way more refined than any Martin Logan I've heard. They're even more refined than the Maggies I've heard. And they put out more bass and they're easier to drive. So I used two different amplifiers with these. First, I used my Nagra Classic amp. It puts out 100 watts per channel. I had to turn up the volume more than usual speakers, but once I got that volume to say 12 o'clock on the Nagra HD Pre, it was, again, intoxicating. It was airy, floaty, everything that an audiophile looks for in a speaker, right? Again, the mid bass is a little leaner in that mid area, which is a trade-off. If they would have pumped up the mid bass of these, or if they could have, we would have lost that wide open crystalline top end, I feel. They wouldn't have been as transparent or three-dimensional. So it's kind of a trade-off there. But with the Nagra amp, the 100 watt per channel, it was powering them to a level that was as loud as I would ever want to hear in here. But if you had a bigger room or wanted to go louder, I feel they would want more power. So I hooked up a couple of amplifiers. They're monoblock amps. They're Class D, 300 watts in the 8 ohms, 500 in the 4. I hooked them up. They are from Orchard Audio. These are their premium monoblocks. They're $2,500 each, $5,000 a pair. And so I was ready to be blown away. I thought that that would inject more oomph into them. What happened was, I think the Orchard Audio amps are a low gain amplifier, which is nice because it keeps noise down to nothing. The Nagra HD Pre is a low gain preamp, so I had to go higher on the volume dial. So I went all the way up to 3 o'clock, and by the time I got there, the sound was just massive, big, room filling, and the sound was smoother than the Nagra amp. It was a little more organic and wholesome sounding. It was a little bit of a different sound where the Nagra was more lit up and airy. The Orchard Audios had a little more drive and half a shade darker. And the bass did wake up a little bit more with the Orchard Audio amps. If I want to get really picky, I could say the Nagra was a little more 3D, but the Nagra costs 4 times as much as the Orchard Audio amps, so keep that in mind. But with both amplifiers, these retained that same sound character of transparent, clean, refined, three-dimensional, holographic soundstage, massive height and depth to the soundstage as well. What about low volume late night listening? That's something I do often, and I love a speaker that I can sit back here at 1 in the morning, turn it to a very low volume, and still get all the benefits of the speaker. Some speakers just shrink and get flat at low volume. I love a speaker that still presents a big, fuller-bodied presentation, even when listening deep into the night. So I put the Nagra amp back in. I sat in my sweet spot. I was using half a watt per channel according to my Nagra amp. It tells you how many watts you're using. And the sound was still the same. Not as big, but that imaging was still there. The vocals were still magic. It was a little maybe thinner sounding, but not too much. So low volume, I turned it up a little bit to pump in 1 watt to them, and they sounded beautiful. They started to flesh out a little bit. And I want to stress, these are not lean speakers in any way. They're crystalline, they're transparent, and they're open. And as far as of all speakers I've ever heard, these are the finest in that transparency and imaging. So if those are your things, you might want to look at these speakers. So again, I want to thank the Music Room for sending these out for review. Now Debbie and I have to figure out how to repackage these back up and get that crate onto a pallet. And I'm not even sure if the driver left the pallet. I think he did, but we'll get it done. I want to thank them. I enjoyed my time with these, and I want to thank all of you guys for watching this review. I also have a full written review over at the website. I'll put a link in the description below to that and to the Music Room, because they are the exclusive online retailer and dealer for Diptyque. If you like this video, thumbs up and subscribe. I have a lot of new gear reviews coming. Stuff seems to be coming in every week here now, so it's going to be a busy year. I love you all. I thank you all, and I will see you very soon in the next one.